Hey, what's going on, guys? I'm Chris, and this is Regular Guy Training. So today we're going to talk about something that honestly is a little bit near and dear to my heart, right? We're going to talk about switch shooting. We're going to talk about ambient controls. We're going to just talk. It's sort of an informal format and that sort of thing. However, I will start with this. I may not shill, but I do have bills. So if you want to come out and train with us, we have a class set in Pennsylvania this coming August. Mechanical pistol is sold out, but self-defense pistol on the 16th and 17th are good to go. This coming September in Eastman, Georgia, we also have a pistol set, September 20 through 22. That's both mechanical and self-defense. We also have a vehicle class, September 28 through 29. Our night vision stuff is sold out. And we also have a dedicated AK class back in Pennsylvania again, March 28 through 30 of 2025. If you want to support the channel, you can easily do that via Patreon with whatever it is that you want to contribute per month. And also, if you want to throw in $41 per month, you can get as much training with us as you like. Those that use $41 a month as their ticket to as many classes as they want to will obviously get access to as many classes as they can stomach. The only classes that are not covered are logistically ridiculous classes like the vehicle class, for instance, or if you want to set up a private class for rather obvious reasons. Or if you don't want to sign up for a monthly thing, you could very easily just go ahead and throw a super thanks located on one of the tabs underneath this video window. But now let's go ahead and get onto the meat and potatoes of this video itself. Something that people have asked me quite a lot on the internet. I cover it a lot when we're teaching classes and that sort of thing. But I'm asked quite a bit about this through the YouTube stuff, and I figured I should close the gap a little bit. So we're going to talk about left-handed shooting first, and then we're going to go ahead and talk about ambient controls. While they do apply to similar things, I view them as separate subjects. The quick on this, the skinnier version of this discussion really is, I think, that similar to fighting in most arenas, right? Being able to fight switch is not so much a super niche thing. It should just be put into your style, right? It should be simply integrated into how you do things. Now, a lot of times we get a lot of opposition from this because we start talking about, oh, it's a super niche thing that is not very much required all that much. What are the chances of you having to do that and that sort of thing? The way that I look at this is that if you are desperately doing everything that you can to make excuses for the weaker part of your fighting style or approach or whatever, you're not going to see many situations in which it might just be a good idea to switch to the left-hand side with this rifle or handgun or whatever. And furthermore, we're going to invent even further excuses as to why, for instance, with a handgun, you won't want to switch over from one side to the other. For instance, oh, well, if you give up a dominant grip, you'll drop the handgun. If you simply drift the handgun from one side, from your right eyeball to your left eyeball, that's going to cover any ambi concern that you would ever have over that, and that's just how you should handle it. So let's address a couple of these, right? Because primarily, at least for right now, until I decide to get bored and go back to primarily left-handed. Right now, I'm primarily shooting right-handed, and I'm left eye dominant. Well, let's back up even further. A while back, a decision was made between myself and Josh. We didn't really like having this sort of weakness. We didn't really like having like a gun in our left or right hand respectively. He's right-handed, I'm left-handed. We didn't like it being on that weak side, and the second that you touch it on that weak or awkward side, the first thing that you wanted to do is go back to the other hand, even if particular tactics or whatever situation that you were in that necessitated that. It's just better to be here. Like, it's just better to be, like my point of view, right? It's just better to be on this right-hand side piece of cover. Or in his case, it's just better to be on this left-hand side based off of what you see, how things are developing, blah, blah, blah. Wanting to stop using the weak side is really kind of what pushed this decision-making process. We kind of both thought about it at the same time, looked at us and be like, well, I have left-handed gear, you have right-handed gear, let's work on it. And we decided to do this for a year straight. That turned into 18 months straight of specifically, deliberately working on the other side. The more time that we spent doing this, the better that we got at it. We started to find out that certain excuses simply don't work because we're putting it into practice now, right? Like, we're really challenging it. So as a for instance, right, like the specific one that I'm talking about is, handgun. If you're right-handed and you got to go on the left-hand side of something, you can simply drift it over to that eyeball. And that's fine if you're in like regular stand-up cover and that sort of thing. I do it now. Again, I'm working handgun right hand and I'm left eye dominant. So if I work it over to the left-hand side, I can just kind of drift it over. I'm already doing that anyway. If I'm coming out of left-hand side piece of cover and I'm standing up, I can just drift it, right? Where this starts to get harder is the smaller that you get, right? Like if specific types of kneeling where you really got to get hunched all the way over, it starts getting really hard because you're starting to really hyperextend that shoulder to make sure that alignment is popped up just because of how the rest of you is hunched over. If I am in an urban prone, laying sideways, trying to go up underneath a car or around a bumper or something, now it's very hard. It's to the point where I'm starting to not be able to see things that I should, when it just should be as easy as switch your friggin' hands. Now, of course, the other half of this is, okay, well, what if you give up dominant control or dominant grip over a handgun, you could easily drop it. No. Just no. This has everything to do with how you make that transition from one side to the other. This has everything to do with how you specifically switch hands. It's more easily explained to someone, for instance, if you're telling them to switch hands with their rifle. If you don't switch your shoulders with a rifle in a particular way, you don't have a ton of control over the rifle in the first place. And the same thing applies with a handgun, right? So I feel uniquely placed to be able to simply describe the fact that no, this isn't the case. It has everything to do with your training and how you apply this sort of stuff, right? The other part of this, and I like to just kind of file this under excuse-making categories, is, a lot of people say, well, if you focus too much on your non-dominant side, then your dominant side becomes weaker over time. I'm going to say, having done this more than once and having switched back and forth over what I'm going to use dominantly multiple times ever since this first year and a half straight, where I just go through these phases where I feel like being left-handed for X amount of time, left-handed rifle and handgun, or I just feel like being right-handed rifle and handgun, which I am right now, even though I'm dealing with a cross-side dominant thing. What I'm going to say, frankly, is the worst thing that happens in total as far as your overall skill set is you're not quite as precise on an emergency reload. While mechanically and problem-solving wise, I actually place great emphasis, or not so much emphasis, but great importance on being able to do a solid emergency reload. And not for the reload itself, but for the decision-making abilities and for the ability to just move your hands, get back on sights, that sort of thing. I think it's a big part of training in general. And then when you have to do full-speed reloads, like later on, you're in under a set of tactical circumstances, it's something I don't even really have to think about anymore. It's something that's completely unconscious, and frankly, it happens really fast. But as far as like the reload itself, right, if I am dominant right-handed for a stretch, my left-handed emergency reloads are a little clunky for a bit, and then it's fine. And what I mean by a little clunky for a bit is like an hour on range where instead of coming in under certain amounts of time that I know I should be coming in on reloads, I'm like a half second behind. Or I bippity bap on the magazine well just a little bit more than I should. No big deal. But as far as the rest of the skill set goes, as far as being able to shoot straight, present guns on target fast, being able to move and shoot at the same time, no, absolutely not. None of this degrades from what was originally my dominant side, and that's the left-hand side. I've never really fallen behind as far as my skill set on my left-hand side of the house, because I recognize that I have tendencies with either side of my body. And by the way, you learn these things when you fight switch enough. And that is, on the left-hand side, I have a tendency to be significantly more precise. But my mechanics overall, just because of how guns are constructed and because I'm in a right-handed controls world, tendency to be a little bit behind on simply manipulating the firearm compared to the right-handed side, which is way faster with manipulating the firearm itself, but less precise as far as the individual shot placement goes. Those are the only real differences that you run into as far as that's concerned. It's not so much a one side is degraded over the other sort of thing, and frankly, it's nonsense. Because if you're teaching your entire body how to accomplish certain skills over years, all it really does is make your whole brain so much faster at everything else. I don't really know that many people that can do this well on either side of their body without any issues that are degraded at any point. And in fact, this is just what I've noticed. Just over time, I've gotten better, quicker than I would with other things. Simple things like, when I'm first learning how to track dots on handguns and that sort of deal, everything is being picked up faster. Working a gun with or without a compensator, everything is working itself faster. Rifle skills at distance while standing up or in cover, making a lot of movement, sprinting, that sort of stuff. All of this weapons manipulation stuff, it gets easier because my brain is now able to process things significantly faster because I forced it to learn foundational skills on either side of my body and then hone those fundamentals, right? Because all advanced stuff is just basic stuff that is greatly honed, and then you start adding little circumstantial issues, and that's what we look at as advanced. So to me, it makes no sense. To me, and notice I haven't said a single thing about wounded shooter drills or anything like that. Because frankly, there are so many more things that are moving around and doing things, or whatever situation that you're in, that have nothing to do with the wounded shooter thing. Rifle is very simple to justify to people. It's easier to negotiate the telephone pole around corners. But with handgun, you have to try harder because my theory is people are just bad with handguns in general, so switching over to their dumb side or their non-dominant side or their stupid side or whatever is just not an appetizing concept to them because they don't want to feel even worse. That's the theory that I have, honestly. But the reality of the matter is that it's easy to justify one-handed shooting because, like, you're at a Walmart, you got your kid or whatever. Now you have to sit here and tell people, it's like, dude, going around that same corner is still easier if you go around that corner on the appropriate side. Going underneath a car in a parking lot is so much easier if you could just switch your friggin' hands and get up underneath the car. Doing things in general is probably easier if you can use both hands. So I don't understand why people then would justify weakness in a fighting style with excuses, right? Like, in general, men are not supposed to make excuses. You're supposed to be able to hold yourself personally accountable for a lot of the things that you do in general. So why it is that a whole side of your body should just be retarded in relation to guns, I'll never actually understand. Right, so, and as an by the way, on top of this, you're just sort of planning for things to go right in individual self-defense or offense, depending if you're in like a military unit or someplace. You're just assuming that things are going to go well all the time. And yeah, you might get away with doing certain things, but you can also drive with your feet. It's not a good idea, right? So there's that. So now, just sort of moving on from that, we're going to go ahead and talk about ambi controls. Now, if you see opposition for, ambi shooting, ambi controls are usually significantly heavier on the opposition side of the house, to the point where I've seen certain schools or certain thought processes straight up say that it's a detriment to you. Now, with handguns, they're a little queer or odd in that the one ambi control I definitely don't want on a handgun, generally speaking, is a magazine release. And usually this is just because of how magazine releases on handguns or handgun frames generally have to work. And in order for them to work that way, a great example of this is like the FNX 45 right, where it does have ambi magazine release. And the issue with that is simply gripping the handgun. If you grip too hard with your non-dominant side, you can actually kick the magazine out, right? I've experienced this under certain sets of circumstances, like for instance, shooting right-handed controls on the left-handed with a pistol, right? I end up eventually having to take those magazine releases and pushing them over, because whether or not I'm conscious of it, I grip really hard with my right hand when I'm shooting left-handed. And I've had many magazines fall out of guns on me. This has happened with M&Ps. This has happened particularly with shields, but this has happened with M&Ps in general before. I've had this happen on like an extended 1911 magazine release. So it doesn't give me the warm and fuzz to do that sort of thing. Whereas, other stuff like Glock magazines, which are a little bit harder to depress and that sort of deal, I don't really care about, and I can just use my index finger to get away with all of that. That, and with 1911, just make the magazine release a little bit smaller and we're good. Point is that generally speaking, though, just how that has to hook up to a magazine itself makes the magazine release generally really squishy and rolly, and you really have to put a lot of effort into getting those magazines out, or they just straight up break easier, or they just straight up don't work as well as they should. So, okay, at least for that, right? If I'm left-handed, I'm going to switch the magazine release over to, that handed side. Like if I'm dominant left-handed, I'm going to switch that over, blah, blah, blah. Generally speaking, if it doesn't interfere with my grip, I do like ambi slide lock levers and that sort of thing. But where you get most contention here is actually with the rifle. Me, personally, as you could probably already put together, man, I just require it. I require full ambi controls across the board as far as the rifle goes, because when I switch from one side to the other, the mechanics really can be quite different. AKs are a great example of this. Right-handed controls, only ARs are very much a good example of this too, because now I have to move my hands completely different from one side to another. And of course that bothers me, right? So I would like a solid, mirror or facsimile of what I'm going to use on either side of that. Now, again, like everything else, there are people without tons of experience on being left-handed, right? Trying to tell you that you shouldn't have left-handed controls on your gun. The greatest opposition actually comes from magazine releases, right? They say, hey, ambi magazine releases aren't fenced in. It's easier to clack your rifle against stuff if you're carrying it right-handed, but you have a lefty control. It's easier to clack that against stuff, and then you have magazines fall out of your gun. Okay, so let's talk about this, right? I have said in the past that, Troy ambi magazine releases are a little overexposed, as a for instance. And there are a bunch of ambi controls that actually factually do agree with this assessment, in that if that ambi control is too exposed, right, this can absolutely happen. So the simple thing to do in that situation, at least in my mind, is, well, get left-handed controls designed for left-handed people and you're good. For instance, the Norgon magazine release. Over time, this has actually become my favorite by far, both as a magazine release if I'm left-handed, and as a left-handed magazine release while carrying the gun right-handed, because it's significantly lower profile and it is harder to depress. What that generally means, and what generally to me means is, I've never had this happen, is I don't have magazines just falling out of my guns, right? What this is look for the lefty control designed for left-handed people, and we don't have an issue, right? The other opposition to this is typically on AR safeties. I cannot express more vehemently, more venomously, how absolutely ridiculous and stupid reduced size safety levers are. You might as well just throw a button on the right-hand side of the gun and call that a safety lever. because, frankly, they're useless. They're very hard to engage. They're very hard to consistently engage, rather. And the solution for not having a safety lever hit the webbing of your hand is to simply go from as straight as possible while carrying the gun right-handed or left-handed or whatever, and simply do that. Like, if you just curl your index finger just a little bit, for instance, if you're right-handed, simply put your index finger into the fencing of the magazine release button, right? Just curl it just a little bit, and you will miss your hand with a full-length safety lever, right? So the short safety levers are dumb, and then the other side of the house where people are like, oh, I don't like it to hit my hand. Again, this is a training and a skill issue, not a controls issue. And then the really stupid ones like ambi charging handles, snag stuff, okay, whatever. This is a charging handle problem, and the only time I've ever seen this was with like kind of an awful charging handle that's way back there in the first place, and it's like a Badger ordnance, which none of you even really remember what a Badger ordnance charging handle is, because everyone uses Radian or something similar now. So that is what it is. To me, and honestly, like, again, once, like bad levers, right? They're super important to me as far as just overall controls on the gun. Not just because the right-handed control, the right-handed reload is fast, right? But because, well, it's a really good ambi device too, as long as you've learned how to properly use the thing. And yeah, there are some people like, well, it's dangerous because that's inside of my trigger guard. If you know how to use a bad lever properly, it's impossible, actually, to make it a safety issue of any sort, really. So again, this is a skill and training issue, not a safety issue. Again, these are all excuses that are just invented by people that just didn't want to actually go look for answers to questions that they had, or just saw a thing, decided that they hated it without looking into it, which, fair enough, there are enough gadgets and gizmos that people do that too. I definitely do it too. But you can't really call something a safety issue when the simple fact is that if it's properly used, safety issues are impossible. It's just a fact. Sorry. So, overall, to me, right, like I'm really, really big on being able to make really quick decisions. There's a lot of people that are anti-think good, in a context of individual self-defense or gunfights in general, or infantry-type combat, or engineer-type combat, or whatever. There are a lot of people that are anti-decision-making, which is ridiculous, because all you do every single day is make decisions. If you're going to make decisions one way or another every single day, you may as well make your brain as fast as possible. And then you may as well facilitate your brain moving as fast as possible. And to me, at least, as far as training goes, as far as controls go, as far as being able to map out how to be successful in those arenas, just like all fighting, if you don't know how to fight switch, you're probably getting beat the fuck up. So those are my opinions on it. Feel free to have a... feel free to call me a fucking idiot in the comments section. And it is what it is at this point. But, enough people have asked me for my opinion on this matter, so I figured I would give it. So, remember guys, a regular guy's firearm is a last defense against tyranny. Basic.